Thor is often positioned as the strongest Avenger, and considering how much butt he kicks on the regular, it's really hard to argue otherwise. But that isn't going to stop me from listing out a bunch of times when he was on the receiving end of the walloping. Because how best to showcase how powerful someone is than to look at how tough their opponents have to be to take them down. Plus, I mean, come on. Sometimes it's fun when the hero loses. From facing off with the Last Son of Krypton all the way to an angel taking human form, these are the most powerful people to have ever taken down the God of Thunder. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. One of the most common arguments amongst comic fans is the good ol' who would win discussion. And of course, the classic pairing that we see all the time is the Avengers versus the Justice League of America. And while the teams have never really definitively faced off, giving us a full-on battle between them, we have gotten a few skirmishes. Which, I mean, I get it. When you're dealing with two companies that have two separate major properties, you don't ever really want to get into a situation where one is definitively seen as being better than the other. That just wouldn't make that great a business sense. Of course, we have seen specific characters from one team being beaten by specific characters from the other team. That has happened at least. During 2003's JLA/Avengers, we got to see Thor go head-to-head with Superman, someone who very rarely has much difficulty taking on foes. And it turned out to be a pretty epic fight, even giving us some Heat Vision versus Thunderbolt action, which is just awesome. In the end though, Superman did wind up getting the upper hand, and he laid the Norse god out. Afterwards, he would admit that Thor was the toughest opponent he had ever faced off against, which is cool and all, but honestly this fight has raised more questions than it's really answered, with many fans arguing that Thor should have won since Superman is weak to magic and Thor's powers fundamentally come from magic. But I guess magic can't really do much against a haymaker. Beings from outer space really seem to have Thor's number, as this next entry clearly shows. During the Avengers vs. X-Men story arc, we got to see something actually pretty terrifying, which is the Phoenix Force split amongst 5 different members of the X-Men, specifically Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Magik, and Colossus. And each one of them proceeded to whoop the snot out of the Avengers time after time after time. And that's the entire team, including Thor. Such as one time where a Phoenix-infused Colossus managed to knock Mjolnir away from Thor's hands, which is not something that anyone is supposed to be able to do. In the end, it took the team systematically and methodically isolating the individual members of the Phoenix Five to take them down. Though with each one that was defeated, the remaining ones became more powerful, so it just kinda made things worse. Until ultimately Hope Summers and Wanda Maximoff teamed up, which led to Cyclops' final defeat, which caused the Phoenix Force to get on and get, once again leaving out into the cosmos. So I guess this entry is technically less of, hey look at this character who beat Thor, and more, hey look at these characters who kinda beat everyone. But Thor is included in that, so it still counts. Speaking of space, how could I not bring up Adam Warlock? Adam Warlock here is easily one of the most powerful beings in Marvel's stable of characters. This is a guy who has just casually taken on Thanos a few times just because, and really done it without breaking any kind of sweat. So yeah, you can imagine that he's more than capable of taking on Thor. In Infinity Revelation, Warlock found himself traveling to various points in history, including one moment before he met the Avengers. Seeing this odd man standing before them, the team saw him as a threat and attacked. It didn't really end well for them. Naturally. Warlock didn't even flinch, even when Thor and Hulk both attacked him at once. He just tossed them about, beating them down without really even trying. But then again, would you really expect anything less from somebody who was so powerful that they were able to ascend and become the living tribunal? I didn't think so. Scarlet Witch has beaten a ton of people over the years. Heck, I've even already done an entire video going over all the characters that she beat that she really had no business defeating. And of course, Thor was one of them. During the early run of Uncanny Avengers, Red Skull had taken Professor X's brain and used it to replace his own. I don't really think that would work like that, but okay, comics, I guess. This gave him the ability to control the minds of others, as you would expect. And one of the people that he took control of was Thor Odinson. Scarlet Witch, of course, was having none of that business, and so she set about doing what heroes do and tried to save the day. This put her in direct conflict with Thor, who definitely put up a fight, despite being hit by a truck at one point. In the end, though, Wanda was able to incapacitate him with a massive blast of chaos magic, which wound up knocking some sense into him and bringing him out from under the control of Red Skull. Luckily for him, it seems that he got off pretty easy, considering what Scarlet Witch did to the entirety of the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness. Yeesh. Beta Ray Bill is one of those characters that leaves a pretty major impression on pretty much anyone who reads about him or even sees his picture anywhere. His rather grotesque facial features are matched only by his overwhelming sense of honor and duty, which have made him an incredibly memorable character. You know what else made him a memorable character? The fact that the first time that he ever met Thor, he proceeded to beat the snot out of him and then steal his hammer. True story, that actually happened. But the beatings didn't end there. A short while later, Odin pitted the two against each other to determine who should be the one to actually wield Mjolnir. Admittedly, it was a super close battle, but ultimately, Bill won out in the end. But Bill showed a lot of compassion towards Thor in his defeat. So to repay his kindness and honor, Odin ordered the creation of Stormbreaker, and gifted it to Bill so that he could set out to protect the people in his own way, creating a new hero. A new hero whose entire origin stems from being able to beat the crap out of another one, because that is how awesome Beta Ray Bill is. I already included Superman on this list, so why not go ahead and include the character who is sometimes referred to as Marvel's Superman, Sentry. And the comparison is actually pretty apt, except for the fact that Sentry is completely crazy and the physical embodiment of a dark power known as the Void. Other than that, it's really uncanny. In Siege, Sentry wound up wrecking some pretty serious havoc. However, once Thor showed up, the tides were turned and he was bested. However, in an alternate telling of the storyline, in What If Norman Osborn won the Siege of Asgard, things went quite a bit differently, as Sentry was able to defeat not just Thor, but the rest of the Avengers as well. Was it an overly flashy win? No, but it still totally counts for the sake of this list. Hulk vs. Thor is a classic face-off in the comics, one that comes up super often actually. Heck, we even got to see it in the MCU during the first Avengers movie. Usually, the fight ends without a decisive winner. However, that very much wasn't the case during Hulk Let the Battle Begin. Here, the two faced off as they had before, only this time Hulk decided that he had had enough of Mjolnir and sought to get it away from Thor. Easier said than done, of course, as Hulk couldn't lift the thing. So he instead attacked Thor's wrist as he was holding the hammer, which caused Mjolnir to smash back into Thor himself, knocking him out. So I guess if you really want to split hairs here, technically Thor beat Thor, but I'm still gonna give the credit to old Jolly Green because, of course I am. Another classic pairing that we see come up time and time again is Thor versus Hercules, someone who is arguably Thor's analog within the Greek pantheon of gods. These two have been fighting off and on since way back in Thor's journey into Mystery Days, but the fight that I want to highlight here comes from the Mighty Thor number 126, where Hercules' libido got the better of him, causing him to hit on a female friend of Thor's, which of course led to the two brawling. In the end, Hercules came out on top, though it should be noted that this may very well be due to the fact that, at the time, Odin had stripped away some of Thor's powers, because that's just the kind of vengeful jerk that Odin is on the page. So Thor wasn't exactly fighting at full strength. But that doesn't really count for much because Hercules has won out a few different times in the comics. So he's definitely earned a spot on this list. Something that happens a lot in Thor's stories is someone, usually Loki, using illusions and enchantments and whatnot to trick him into fighting other heroes who actually mean him no harm. At some point, you would think that Thor would learn and just stop jumping into combat with every single thing that he perceives as even a minor threat. But then again, you know, Thor's gonna Thor, I guess. More than one time though, this didn't end super well for the guy. such as when he faced off against the extreme sports-loving Herald of Galactus in Silver Surfer number 4. Thor launched into combat with him with the same gusto that he usually brings with him. But the Silver Surfer proved to be more than a match for him, due in large part to the fact that Loki also magically boosted Surfer's powers. As you would expect, after the fight, the two realized the ruse and wound up teaming up to go up against Loki together. Still totally counts though. The Sorcerer Supreme is one of the most powerful beings in Marvel, and yet not a lot of people think about Doctor Strange when they talk about strong characters. But anyone who read New Avengers number 34 would know that this guy is not someone to be messed with. Not even a little bit. In that comic, Daniel Drum was out for revenge for the death of his brother Voodoo. To achieve his goals, he possessed several other major characters, such as Red Hulk, Luke Cage, The Thing, and of course, Thor. All in an effort to try to defeat the Avengers. And though that seemed like a super sound plan, he pretty quickly ran into the brick wall that is Doctor Strange. Strange unleashed all of his mystical magic might, and managed to take down all of the possessed heroes with very little effort, including the God of Thunder. I know, this is another example of Thor being possessed, then beaten by somebody. But even while possessed, Thor still has his powers, which means he's still a pretty massive threat. So, even though he's under the control of somebody else, I think it still counts. Cause I mean, a freight train being driven by one guy is still just as powerful as a freight train being driven by somebody else. They're both still gonna hurt if they hit you. I don't care what hero you're talking about, anyone who has to go up against an entire team is going to have a bad time. One such example of this is when Thor had to go up against the entirety of the Ultimates. The Ultimates, of course, being the Avengers-esque team from the Ultimate Universe. At one point, Loki tricked all of the Ultimates into thinking that Thor was not actually a god. This placed Thor in direct conflict with the team. At first, Thor didn't want to hurt his friends, so he held back a bit. But pretty soon he had to abandon that just in order to keep ahead of them. And then the Ultimates were ultimately able to defeat Thor and capture him. It was a rough situation in general for Thor. But of course, ultimately Loki didn't get away with it, and Thor resumed his heroic duties. We here at CBR have been talking about the Inhumans quite a bit lately. At least I have, as I've just recently done 2 separate videos that both talk about Terrigenesis and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's been on my mind a lot lately. So having Black Bolt here on the list feels kind of appropriate right now. In What If the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man, Thor was overtaken by the possessed Spider-Man in the Hulk, which is where Black Bolt came in. He showed up to the fight and used his voice to break things up, with his voice proving to be so powerful that it bested not only the symbiote, but also knocked Thor aside. It didn't vaporize him though, luckily. Ghost Rider is a character that I feel gets a lot less credit than he deserves. This guy is pretty flippin' powerful. In fact, Doc Strange once said that Ghost Rider's power is potentially limitless. And yet, not a lot of people talk about him, I feel. But that didn't stop him from beating the snot out of Thor. In Avengers number 214, Ghost Rider found himself facing off against members of the Avengers. After taking out Captain America and Iron Man, he found himself face to face with the God of Thunder. Thor tried to end the fight quickly by throwing Mjolnir at him, which would have worked, except for the fact that Ghost Rider was really quick and simply grabbed the hammer, riding it back towards Thor. The momentum allowed him to knock Thor out as soon as it returned to his hand. Then, Ghost Rider simply sauntered off, leaving the Avengers huddled over in defeat. Simon Williams, aka Wonder Man, didn't exactly have the best time in the early days of Marvel Comics. In Avengers number 9, the Masters of Evil experimented on him, turning him into the enhanced individual we know him as, and then proceeded to pit him against Earth's mightiest heroes. Wonder Man quickly found himself facing off against Thor, in a fight that actually ended pretty quickly. Essentially, Wonder Man moved in and sucker punched Thor, knocking him out of the fight and into a big hole. For years afterwards, even after joining the Avengers, Williams proceeded to brag about his win over the God of Thunder to pretty much anyone who would listen to him. Considering how rough his origins are, I think that Thor should kind of just bite his tongue and let him have this one. Finally, let's talk about that one time that Thor got his butt handed to him by his sister. Original Sin, Thor and Loki, revealed that Thor had a sister named Angela who was hidden from him, with her instead being raised in the 10th realm known as Heaven. Thor and Loki went to this realm and wound up in combat with an army of angels, including Angela. She eventually took him on herself and whooped the tar out of him. Though in fairness to Thor, he was tired from having fought an entire army of angels beforehand, and also he didn't really have it in himself to take on his own sister. Didn't really stop her from stomping on him though, so that's a win for the angelic sister. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video and I want to know what you think. Who do you think could take on Thor? Whether from comics or otherwise. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.